Good evening and welcome to the channel. Tonight we are going to examine something that has happened over the past 72 hours that no official press conference, no Truth Social post, and no White House statement has been able to explain away. The United States of America, the country that launched the most significant military campaign in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The country that has struck more than 7,000 targets across Iran in 19 days, the country whose president declared Iran's military capabilities 100% destroyed, is tonight unable to open a 39-kilometer stretch of water. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes every single day, is being controlled by the country that America has been bombing for 19 consecutive days. Not by the United States Navy, not by a NATO coalition, not by the combined military power of the Western Alliance, by Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, whose leadership has been systematically assassinated, whose bases have been bombed, whose missile launchers have been destroyed by bunker-busting munitions, is today deciding who enters the Strait of Hormuz and who does not. India's ships go through. Pakistan's ships go through, Turkish ships go through, China's ships go through, American ships, Israeli ships, British ships, the tankers carrying oil to Europe and Japan and South Korea, they do not go through, unless Iran says so. And Iran is not saying so. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because what we are documenting here is not simply a military story. It is a story about power, about who actually controls the world's most important waterway, and about what it means when the stated goals of the most expensive military operation in recent American history have failed to produce the single most important practical outcome that was supposed to justify the war in the first place. Let us begin by establishing precisely what has happened over the past 72 hours, because the sequence of events is more revealing than any individual statement within it. On Saturday, March 15th, Trump posted on Truth Social naming China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom as countries that should send warships to the Strait of Hormuz to help keep it open. He said they were on the way. He said some were very enthusiastic. He declined to name a single one. On Sunday, he told the Financial Times that NATO faces a very bad future if allies fail to assist. He specifically criticized the United Kingdom by name, saying when he asked them to come, they did not want to come. He said NATO is a one-way street. On Monday, he said numerous countries have told me they are on the way, and again declined to name any of them. Secretary of State Rubio was supposed to make an official announcement about the coalition. No announcement came. On Tuesday, the responses from the named countries arrived one by one with the cumulative force of a diplomatic rejection that could not be characterized as anything else. Germany said, "This is not our war. We have not started it." France said never, in the current context, would France take part in operations to open or free the Strait of Hormuz. Australia said it was not asked and will not be sending ships. Japan said it has legal constraints on overseas military deployments. South Korea said it was carefully reviewing the situation, which is diplomatic language for no. The European Union's top diplomat said nobody is ready to put their people in harm's way in the Strait of Hormuz. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of Trump's closest allies, told reporters he had spoken to the president and had never heard him so angry in his life. And then on Tuesday, Trump did something that reveals more about the actual state of this military operation than any battlefield report could. He reversed course entirely. He said, "We do not need any help, actually." He dropped his push for allied support. He said the outside military support he had been working to muster is no longer necessary. The man who 24 hours earlier said NATO faces a very bad future if it does not help, now said the U.S. does not need NATO's help. That 180-degree reversal in 24 hours is not a strategic recalibration. It is a public retreat dressed up as self-sufficiency. Now let us examine why Trump cannot actually open the Strait of Hormuz, because understanding the geography and the military logic is essential to understanding why the most powerful navy in the world is currently unable to solve a problem in a waterway 39 kilometers wide. The Strait of Hormuz is Iran's single greatest strategic advantage in this conflict, and it does not require a functioning air force, a functioning navy, or intact ballistic missile launchers to exercise it. All it requires is geography and the willingness to occasionally strike a slow-moving commercial tanker. The strait is flanked on the north by Iranian territory. The navigable shipping lanes are narrow. A fully loaded supertanker moves at approximately 15 kilometers per hour. It cannot maneuver quickly. It cannot evade a fast attack boat, a drone, or a shore-launched anti-ship missile. A European diplomat explained the fundamental problem to NBC News with a precision that no official American statement has matched. He said even if European navies are sent to the Gulf, it would not ensure the strait is reopened. Iran can keep it closed as long as it likes because all it takes is a drone or a mine. That assessment cuts through 19 days of official American communications with surgical accuracy. The United States Navy can escort a warship through the Strait of Hormuz. It cannot escort a 200,000-ton oil tanker with the agility of a warship. And Iran does not need to sink every tanker to keep commercial shipping out. It needs to sink enough tankers with enough regularity that the insurance markets price the risk of transit as commercially unviable, which is exactly what has happened. Tanker traffic dropped by approximately 70% in the first weeks of the war. Over 150 ships anchored outside the strait rather than attempt transit. California gasoline prices exceeded $5 per gallon. The global benchmark Brent crude rose more than 40% from the price it was on February 28th. The IEA declared this the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global market. All of that has happened despite 19 days of American bombing, 5,000 bunker-busting munitions, 7,000 targets struck, 100 Iranian naval vessels destroyed, according to Trump's own claims, and the killing of Iran's supreme leader, its defense minister, its IRGC commander, its national security chief, its intelligence minister, and the head of its Basij force. With all of that military power applied, the strait is still controlled by Iran, not militarily closed. Controlled. And that distinction is the most important analytical fact in this entire conflict. Iran made the operational logic of this control explicit through its foreign ministry on Monday. Spokesperson Esmail Baghaei said insecurity created by the U.S. and Israel had led Iran to tighten oversight of vessels passing through the strait. He said parties not involved in the military aggression against Iran have been able to pass through in coordination with permission from Iran's armed forces. He said no coastal country can allow enemy ships to pass normally to strengthen themselves and carry out aggressive actions. The IRGC naval commander Alireza Tangsiri had previously said any vessel intending to pass must get permission from Iran. What Iran has done is transform the Strait of Hormuz from an international waterway into an Iranian checkpoint. And in doing so, it has demonstrated something that has not received adequate analytical attention. Iran does not need to win the military war to win the strategic war. It does not need to destroy the American Navy. It does not need to withstand indefinite bombing. It needs the economic cost of the closed strait to exceed the political cost to the Trump administration of continuing the bombing. And every day that oil stays above $100 per barrel, every day that American gas prices rise, every day that European economies absorb the energy shock, every day that Asian economies dependent on Gulf oil recalculate their supply chain assumptions, the pressure on Washington to find an exit increases. Al Jazeera's analysis on Wednesday described exactly this dynamic. Pro-government figures in Iran are increasingly framing the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic bargaining tool beyond the war itself, suggesting it could be used to extract compensation, sanctions relief, or broader economic concessions after the war ends. Iran is not simply using Hormuz as a weapon in the current conflict. It is using Hormuz as leverage for the negotiation it calculates will eventually be necessary. Every day the strait stays closed is a day Iran adds to the price tag America will need to pay to reopen it. The countries that have found their way through Hormuz tell their own story about who actually controls access to it, and that story directly undermines the American framing of this conflict. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi called Iranian President Pezeshkian directly. They negotiated. 2 Indian-flagged gas tankers passed through the strait. Pakistan negotiated safe passage, and its ships went through. Turkish ships went through. Chinese ships went through. Iran allowed passage to countries that are not at war with it, that are not providing military support to the American campaign, and that treated it as a sovereign entity capable of making decisions about its own territorial waters. The countries that were supposed to constitute America's coalition, the ones Trump named on Truth Social, the ones he threatened with NATO consequences, the ones he called out individually for failing to help, none of them got their ships through because none of them are able to negotiate independently with Iran while their governments are publicly allied with the American war effort. India, Pakistan, Turkey, and China have all found ways to get their oil through Hormuz precisely because they are not parties to the American-Israeli campaign. The countries that are closest to the United States are the ones most completely locked out of the waterway that American military power has been unable to reopen for 19 days. There is a second dimension to this story that goes directly to the question of what the United States was trying to accomplish when it launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th. Trump said the operation was about preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. He said it was about regime change. He said it was about Iran's threat to the United States. He said it was about unconditional surrender. He said Iran had been totally destroyed. He said Iran wanted a deal. He has offered at least 4 different justifications for the war in 19 days. And the stated goal has shifted each time the previous one became harder to defend. But underneath all of those shifting justifications, the practical argument for the war that has the most resonance with ordinary Americans is the simplest one. That American military power applied at sufficient scale would produce an outcome where the Middle East was more stable, Iran was less dangerous, and the global energy supply was more secure. 19 days in, the Middle East is less stable. Iran is still firing missiles. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The global energy supply has suffered its worst disruption in history. And the United States is in an argument with its own allies about who is supposed to fix the situation that the United States created. The intelligence dimension of this failure deserves specific attention because it was raised directly in Wednesday's Senate Intelligence Committee hearing. Tulsi Gabbard testified that Iran's regime appears to be intact but largely degraded. She said its conventional military power projection capabilities have largely been destroyed, leaving limited options. CIA Director Ratcliffe insisted Iran had posed an immediate threat when the decision to strike was made. But neither of them addressed the question that the Hormuz closure raises most sharply. The American defense establishment, according to NBC News sources, significantly underestimated Iran's willingness to restrict traffic in the strait. That phrase, significantly underestimated, is the kind of phrasing that appears in intelligence assessments when the operational assumptions on which a campaign was based turn out to be wrong. The assumption was that American military power applied at sufficient scale would deter Iran from exercising its geographic leverage. That assumption has been refuted by 19 days of operational evidence. Iran has not been deterred. It has closed the strait. It has maintained the closure despite the most intensive American bombing campaign since the Gulf War. And it has simultaneously demonstrated that it has the organizational capacity to selectively open the strait for non-enemy countries while keeping it closed to the American coalition. That is not the behavior of a deterred adversary. That is the behavior of an adversary that has made a strategic calculation that the costs of maintaining the closure are lower than the costs of conceding it. The economic consequences of this failure are now being felt globally in ways that no reserve release and no diplomatic communique can fully address. The IEA released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves. Oil prices dropped briefly and then recovered. Brent crude is above $105 per barrel. U.S. gas prices are $3.79 per gallon and rising. Gulf oil exports from the 8 major producing countries have fallen between 60% and 70% from February levels. Daily shipping through the strait has dropped from the equivalent of about 20 million barrels per day to a fraction of that. The world economy is running, in the energy equivalent sense, on fumes. And every day the Strait of Hormuz remains closed is a day the economic pressure compounds. Qatar's Ras Laffan, the world's single largest liquefied natural gas export facility, has been repeatedly attacked and is operating under threat. 20% of the world's LNG supply passes through the same waterway that Iran is controlling. Europe, which imports enormous quantities of LNG, particularly since the Russia-Ukraine war disrupted pipeline flows, is now facing the second major energy supply disruption in 4 years from a different direction. The inflation consequences of that disruption will take months to fully materialize. The Federal Reserve, which had been preparing to cut interest rates, is now paralyzed because cutting rates into an oil shock risks reigniting exactly the inflation that took 2 years to bring under control after 2022. Trump's response to the failure of his coalition-building effort followed the pattern that his responses to all failures in this conflict have followed. Blame someone else, reverse course, claim the original position was never necessary, threaten something new. He said, America does not need help. He said allies would be responsible for the strait themselves. He posted on Truth Social wondering what would happen if America finished off what is left of the Iranian terror state and let the countries that use the strait be responsible for it. That post is worth examining analytically because it contains a logical problem that the president appears not to have identified. If America has already, as Trump has repeatedly claimed, destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability, sunk more than 100 Iranian naval vessels, struck 7,000 targets, and eliminated virtually every senior Iranian official, then there is nothing left to finish off. The threat to escalate against a country that has allegedly already been completely destroyed contains an internal contradiction that the Strait of Hormuz problem makes visible. You cannot threaten to destroy something you have already declared destroyed. And yet the strait remains closed. The missiles keep flying, and Iran's foreign minister is on Al Jazeera explaining the new terms under which passage through the strait will be permitted going forward. Before I hand it over to you, 3 questions for tonight. Question A. Iran has now demonstrated that it can selectively open and close the Strait of Hormuz based on which countries are and are not participating in the American war effort. India, Pakistan, Turkey, and China all got their ships through by negotiating directly with Tehran. American allies could not. Is Iran's geographic control of the Strait of Hormuz a permanent strategic reality that no military campaign can fully eliminate? And if so, what does that mean for the stated goals of Operation Epic Fury? Question B, Trump called on China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and NATO to send warships to the strait. Every single one of them declined or gave non-committal responses. Trump then reversed course and said, America does not need help. A European diplomat told NBC News that Iran can keep the strait closed as long as it likes because all it takes is a drone or a mine. Do you believe the United States military has a viable plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz? Or is the reality that no military solution to the Hormuz problem currently exists? And question C. The countries getting oil through Hormuz right now are countries that are not American allies in this war. India negotiated, Pakistan negotiated, Turkey passed through, China received millions of barrels of Iranian crude throughout this conflict. The countries that cannot get their oil through are the countries closest to the United States. Does that pattern tell you something about who is winning this war at the strategic level, even if the battlefield kills are running in America's favor? Drop your answers in the comments. Every response gets read. Evidence first, analysis second.